A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one important thing.
Welcome to the Spiritual Hedgehog podcast, where we explore the role philosophy and faith play in your daily life. Here are your hosts, Ira Gardner and Pastor Eric Dahl.
I've been curious your explanation a little bit more about why the hedgehog, what's captured imagination, the parable of the hedgehog. I know you're doing some other podcasts in the midst of thinking how to reach and entertain important conversations that need to be happening around us.
Well, so for those of you that aren't familiar with the hedgehog parable, it's an ancient Greek poet wrote essentially this line that translates as, "The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one great thing." And actually, that's a concept that's been bandied around a lot in business, meaning that successful companies have one hedgehog concept that guides all their decisions and their choices. And I found myself thinking about, in my personal life, the hedgehog concept that I always have to be in touch with is this connection to my faith, and the fact that my life can go off the rails if I think that I'm in control all the time. And it's just that reminder that, you know what, there but the grace of God go I is kind of a reality on a daily basis. And so for me, the hedgehog concept manifests itself in the secular world in terms of the compass and direction and the important things in life that allows us to simplify things a little bit in a complex world, and allows us to really focus on our purpose and intent. But on a deeper level, for me, it's this idea of always remembering that the spiritual part of my life is actually what keeps it's the rudder that keeps my personal direction going in the right direction. And every time in my life where I've forgotten that is when I end up, running into walls and falling into ditches. And so I was thinking about just how can we have a conversation that allows us to explore that instead of this total separation of, okay, we only talk about it on Sunday. How can we have a conversation about it in a way that allows us to engage our compassion and wisdom, but also just our acceptance and gratitude in the face of challenging times?
Yeah, what makes me thinking of when you first pose the idea is I think is that movie City Slicker. Do you ever see that movie?
I love that movie. Yeah.
Well, Curly, right? Curly's riding the horse, and who's the main actor? Billy Crystal is riding, but I can't remember his character's name. But he's riding next to him, and they're talking, and Curly talks about, this, my secret to life. It's one thing, and Billy Crystal's asking, well, what's that one? And he said, that's what you've got to figure out. And thinking about that, so for me, the interest in thinking about that one thing and thinking about the hedgehog who knows really one thing very well. One of the things, sort of our target in that, and thinking about how I'm thinking about faith and life and meaning, is this idea of calling moving forward, and thinking about how is it that we in our faith lives understand what our purpose and meaning is, and not just our faith lives, because I would argue, granted I'm a pastor, but our spiritual lives are what influence our everything from our joy to how we deal with suffering, to how we deal in our day lives, getting us to get up in the morning, to what we're thinking about when we wake up at 3:00 in the morning, and saying, am I on the right path here? Am I on the right track? What's leading and guiding me? So I think when you brought up that idea of how we enter into these questions, not just in a segmented time, which many of us think of our religious lives as this segmented time. I do that on Sundays, or I do that on Saturday night, or maybe it's even on Friday night, folks. And saying, well, if it is going to really important in our lives, we do need to think about it from not only Sunday 8:30, 10:45, or whatever you choose as your flavor, to how is this lead and guiding me in what I'm doing in my day-to-day life, everywhere from being a parent to being a photographer or a teacher or a filmmaker or whatever it may be. Yeah, so I'm excited about that idea concept moving forward.
Well, I'm excited to share it with you and just have these conversations. We've known each other a long time now. I mean, gosh, it's been over 20 years now.
It has. Yeah. How old were our kids? Boy, they were
like 7,
6 or 7. Yeah.
T-ball.
Yeah. T-ball. It might have even been 5. I can't remember. Yeah. It was a while ago.
It was, yeah.
And T-ball, and trying to get them to run the right direction around the bases and those things. But I think, and I just to say, I think one of the many things I appreciate, and I've always appreciated about you, is you're willing to go in depth and be a little bit vulnerable in the midst of what's happening. And I hope, that will come across in whatever we're doing here. And hopefully I can provide the same, where I think as I talk about my work as a pastor these days, I'm more and more convinced that what helps spirituality come alive is a bit of vulnerability. And too often, some of the downside of what happens is in religion or in churches is that lack of being willing to risk, thinking that if I come up and say with an idea that really isn't quite orthodox, it's going to suddenly cause this problem. So we don't risk. Instead, realizing that Jesus, who is obviously my big leader as I follow my spirituality, was one that invited that risk, and never the people that he would get most angry with was never the ones that were making the mistakes. Instead, it was the ones that thought they always had all the answers and knew the right way to do things. And so hopefully we can risk in the midst of some of this podcast as well as we move forward.
Well, I like the expression of not letting perfection get in the way of progress.
Yeah. That's a good way. That's also maybe a little bit my personality type, because I think if everything had to be about perfection, which I know you can be you have to be with your photography, with some of the things, but at the same time, so I hopefully we'll balance each other out that way a little bit, because I think you'll bring a little bit of that eye to the detail, and hopefully I can help in some of that other aspect of saying, that's good enough to lead us into further mistakes. So, we'll go from there, see where it leads and guides us.
Well, the other thing I think about in terms of the one thing is that the people that I have known throughout my life that just had a contentment, not just joy. I mean, euphoric happiness is a very temporary thing, but that deep, settled, grounded happiness that were thriving in their lives all seem to have that spiritual quality about them. And the idea that you don't have to know everything, but you have a lens through which you pass all your actions and all your judgments through, that allows you to stay grounded in the midst of a lot of life's challenges. And I think the thing that I've enjoyed is over the 20 plus years of knowing each other, we've both been through interesting life challenges, and it's always been, I've watched it, it's always been this sort of ebb and flow, but always coming back to center. And through our faith relationship, that's really been that always the finding the path forward through that. And so just being able to talk to other people recently that are having, they're willing to talk about what it takes for them to do what they do on a daily basis. I look forward to sharing some of those conversations as we go forward.
No, absolutely. I think that what is it that centers each of us, and allowing and to understand that through life experience that's going to shift a bit, but we tend to return to certain things that ground us, and what that and we're looking for those things that can hold us in the midst of, especially this time that we're in right now, where everything in the news, if you're watching too much of the news, you're hearing about death, and you're hearing about those things that cause a lot of fear in people's lives. And so both, a grounding in the midst of that, but then also a willingness to say, and I'm learning. My hope is in these conversations that I will be pushed to expand not only my understanding, but emotional maturity in the midst of how I respond to people that think very differently than I do, and yet be able to articulate in ways what continues to ground me, and what continues to hold me in the midst of the various trials and tribulations that come across our lives. So we'll see where this goes. And I look
Well,
forward
and
to
then you can't help but note that the hedgehog is an interesting animal in that it tends to curl itself in a defensive ball.
it. Right.
And I do think that that metaphor of trying to uncoil and that regroup, and I think that the hedgehog always comes out of the ball to move forward, but there's always that regrouping part. And I found myself thinking about that in relation to the word religion, which is the idea of reconnect.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to having conversations with folks and invite you to send questions, comments, and help shape the conversation as we move forward of how do we reconnect and how do we maintain a connection? And again, the COVID-19 is really exposing the reality of how interconnected we are. And I think we've been living through a period of, at least within the political realm, a period of divisiveness and a bit of a us and them. And the reality is the recognition that we're all in it together.
Yeah. And what are we trying? I think that's the tension that I think we'll find, and you'll hear me probably over our time talk a lot about tension in the midst of these understandings. Is one of the tensions is in that question of we want to reconnect with, right? And I think what you and me, the two of us, you can make fun of my grammar later, is we have an understanding that interconnectedness isn't just what we grew up with, or but it needs to be expanded always through education, through new experiences, through new understandings. If fear is what's behind our connectedness, that we want to put a box around and say, this is where I'm comfortable, this is what feels safe, and if that's the one thing, you're probably not going to want to listen to our cast. I think we would say to everybody else out there, because I think that further connectedness, if religion is about reconnecting, from in the Latin understanding, I think we have to understand that connecting is with all of humanity and all of creation. That's becomes the next piece. So I think you'll see, I think the direction we both want to go with this will be to push some of those a little bit, to explore, to hear where some of those thinkers are, to realize, yeah, I have some holes in my own thinking that will continue to be refined and reshaped. But we'll continue to come back with a basis of one, for the two of us, care and concern for one another, respect for one another, no matter where that conversation goes. And if we can model that, I think we'll have done a good thing.
Well, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the fact that, I'm not a particularly demonstrative faith person. Like it's a very personal, private thing. For me, always has been. Um, and I think that what scares me, but what excites me is that those meaningful conversations in your life always have that little bit of butterfly in the stomach of, okay, this, it could be from being vulnerable, but also could be the unknown, the fear of the unknown, or the fear of not wanting to sound ignorant, or just, so these conversations have a certain dramatic tension for me a little bit, and I think probably for you as well.
Yeah. Well, I think what did I tell you, Ira, when we were thinking about doing this? It's exciting and it scares the bejeebers out of me, to maybe keep it clean right now. Anyway, there is something terrifying about putting yourself out there. And I'm trying to, obviously I wear a hat as I enter this conversation, but I also want to bring enough of myself that's outside of that one calling, and be vulnerable enough to say, I'm learning. So if I stink at this, which I think is what I said, the literal word I used, I go, I'm scared I'm going to stink at this. Well, I at least pushed myself in modeling what I want to model for everybody else is put yourself out there, risk failure, because we live in a day and age where I think we've lost a sense of that. And that can be one of our podcasts moving forward too, is thinking about how, where's that, what's happened to that, and how do we teach people to fail once again? I'm kind of curious about that.
So let's just let's try to wrap this up a little bit by focusing on our mission for a little bit in terms of what we've talked about. What is one way that you move past the vocation of your profession of a pastor and actually engage with your spiritual practice on a not the pastor, but Eric the man? Like how does that come into your life on a daily or weekly or periodic basis?
Well, I think family. I mean, I think family does that. I don't know if I can totally separate those two out all the time. I think there ends up being a bunch of things that I think from the time I was a kid. So I guess the story I would tell in the midst of that is I wasn't always going to be a pastor. When I traveled to India and came back, my sister would have told you that I came back depressed. I would tell you I came back very contemplative. And in the midst of, if I'm trying to bring something different, it's this spirit of curiosity and a spirit of love in the midst of what I'm doing. So that doesn't just play a part that I bring that to my role as a pastor, but that pastor part doesn't exclude then allowing me to be curious and to think about how do I show compassion and love in the midst of everything I'm doing. Don't do it perfectly. There are many places where I'll fall down in the midst of that, but I think if I were saying in my spirit there's an overriding calling, it has to do with learning to love and in all its aspects. And what I've been playing with actually in my preaching lately is thinking about how love and suffering have this tight connection, because if you love anything, you're going to suffer in the midst of it. If you're going to expose and be vulnerable enough to love, you're going to suffer, and people are going to take advantage of it. Sometimes you're going to suffer because people that you love get hurt and you've entered into their lives. And yeah, so I guess that's how I'd answer it. How would you answer the same question? I mean, you come with, this vocation of any vocations. I think you wear a number of hats. Or you're a businessman, you're a teacher, you're a photographer, you're an artist, you're all of these things. But when you look at, kind of peel those different external things away. I mean, what do you think you're trying to bring to this? That's a core of who Ira is.
Well, to answer my own question about it, in terms of where does it come from, it goes back to a song I learned when I was a teenager, and it was going to Young Life Malibu up in Canada, and you had no electronics, you had no TV, and if you wanted to make sound or music, you sang. And we had the song, love him in the morning when you see the sun rising, love him in the evening because he took you through the day. And majority of days of my life, I wake up and that's the song that's on my lips. It's like my morning prayer and it's my end of the day prayer. And when my son was young, I sang it to him every morning. I sang it to him at bedtime every day. And for me, it's about remembering to be grateful and just remembering gratitude. And so for me, in my vocation, I'm a teacher, and so I aspire to wisdom and compassion in that vocation. But really, the beyond the teacher, probably the thing I'm looking for is to have compassion and forgiveness of myself, so to speak, for my own imperfections or my own. And so just keeping that song in my heart throughout the day. It certainly plays a role in my art, because every time I see beauty in the world, or just even the smallest little things, the light can be amazing. Like just today, you stepped away from the monitor and I'm like, wow, you're the scene through the layer of your window screen is just beautiful. It's a dreamlike quality that I'm like, yeah, that's something to be grateful for. And for me, that elevates to a little spiritual moment all the time in my life.
I love the fact that that is something that I've, over the 20 plus years of our friendship, that I think I've seen develop in you even more so. I think you always had a piece of it, but having the eyes to see beauty in many places, and to be grateful for that, and to bring that spirit out. So yeah, thanks for that, Ira.
Thank you. And it's kind of ironic. It's only been in the last few years that I really have allowed myself to see myself as an artist. I mean, it's strange. I saw myself as a business person, teacher, but artist, and really getting to that moment of creativity. Real creativity happens at a spiritual level. I mean, it's and that's a whole nother conversation that we'll have at some point, is just the role creativity has in our daily lives. And I believe everybody's creative. I believe everybody has the opportunity to become creative. And through that process, we get in touch with something very powerful, very deep within us.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So can you underlay that "Love Him in the Morning" when you sing the song somehow on our podcast here? I used to be able to play that. I used to play that one on the piano. And in the in-between time, when you feel
the pressure burning.
Yeah.
Remember that he loves you and he promises to stay. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you think you have to worry. Yeah. It's one of those that just stays with you. It's kind of like some people do the rosary. For me, it's that song.
Yeah. Well, thanks for putting that in my head. I'll be humming myself now as we're moving. So thanks. Thanks, Ira.
You bet. And thank everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And please contribute to the conversation. We will post an email address for you to send any questions or comments to in the show notes, and look forward to hearing from you.
Have a good day.
All right.
Thank you for joining us today on the Spiritual Hedgehog. For show notes and more information, go to www.thespiritualhedgehog.com.